On July 1, 2011, Germany dismantled its conscription, convinced that military threats belong to the past. 13 years later, Europe's most pacifist power is scrambling to rebuild an army, just as NATO warns it needs 460,000 troops before 2029, and Russia's tank factories work round the clock. Why is Germany reviving military service now, and what if it's not enough? When Germany ended conscription on July 1, 2011, the decision was championed by Defense Minister Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg. He stood before Parliament and declared that the era of mass armies was over. The threat from the East, he argued, no longer justified forcing young men into uniform. Guttenberg called for a modern, professional force that would be smaller, more mobile, and focused on overseas humanitarian missions, not on defending German soil. The Bundestag and the cabinet agreed almost unanimously. The Cold War was history, and so it seemed, was the need for a mass mobilization army. But the consequences were immediate and far-reaching. Within months, the Bundeswehr began shrinking. In 2011, Germany's armed forces stood at 255,000. Today, that number is just 182,000. More than 400 local draft offices closed their doors. Training barracks were shuttered or sold off, with capacity now capped at just 5,000 recruits per year. The pipeline of reservists, once nearly 1 million strong in the 1990s, collapsed to around 60,000. The infrastructure that had quietly underpinned Germany's ability to defend itself simply vanished. Guttenberg's reasoning was clear at the time: cost savings, a changing security environment, and a desire to align with other professional NATO armies. But the scale of the drawdown went beyond budgets. It was a bet that Germany would never again have to mobilize at speed or scale. The Bundeswehr's focus pivoted to peacekeeping in Afghanistan and the Balkans. Territorial defense faded from doctrine. The machinery of national mobilization, painstakingly built over decades, was dismantled in just a few years. Critics would later call this the most consequential security policy mistake in post-war German history. Guttenberg himself, in rare interviews after 2022, conceded that the decision was a product of its time, one that must now be reconsidered. But in 2011, there was little public debate. The infrastructure for mass service, once woven into every German town, was left to decay. The result was a force too small to meet new threats, and a country unprepared for the demands of collective defense. The gap created by that single decision would haunt German security planners for years to come. On February 24, 2022, Russian tanks crossed into Ukraine. For Germany's military planners, decades of assumptions vanished overnight. The idea that Europe's borders were secure no longer held. In Berlin, classified briefings spelled out the scale of the new danger. Intelligence analysts reported that Russia was producing 1,500 tanks a year, far more than NATO's top 5 members combined. Not all those tanks were destined for Ukraine. Some intelligence suggested Moscow was stockpiling for something larger, a potential confrontation with NATO itself. This was a strategic shock. The warnings landed hardest with General Carsten Breuer, chief of the Bundeswehr. Breuer had seen Germany's limitations firsthand in Afghanistan, where logistics and readiness often lagged behind ambition. Now he faced a different kind of deadline. By 2029, he warned that Russia could be ready to attack NATO. Some analysts put the window even earlier. Breuer's message was blunt. He said Germany must be able to fight tonight. That is the lesson from Ukraine, and the clock is ticking. This is a national deadline. The Suwalki Gap, a narrow 65-kilometer corridor linking Poland and Lithuania, became the focus of every war game. If Russia seized it, the Baltic states could be cut off from the rest of NATO in days. German troops would be the first line of defense. But the Bundeswehr's numbers fell far short of what the alliance now demanded. The force stood at 182,000 active soldiers and 60,000 reservists. At recent summits, NATO set a new target: 260,000 active personnel and 200,000 reservists for Germany alone, to be achieved by the mid-2030s. That requirement meant nearly doubling the force in less than a decade. The Suwalki Gap is a geographic vulnerability. The government responded with a €100 billion special fund called the Sondervermögen and a promise to spend €162 billion on defense by 2029. But money alone could not solve the problem. Training centers, barracks, and draft offices had been dismantled over the previous decade. At current recruiting rates, it would take more than half a century to reach the new targets. With the 2029 deadline looming, Germany faced a stark choice: find new ways to fill the ranks, or risk leaving NATO's eastern flank exposed. General Breuer's assessment carried weight in the Chancellery and the Bundestag. The question was no longer whether Germany needed a larger army, but how to build it in time. That meant revisiting the very idea of conscription, a system dismantled with such confidence just 14 years earlier. For a country that had leaned on restraint, the political and constitutional obstacles were enormous. Turning back to mass service would be unprecedented in the post-war era, and it was now driven by urgent strategic necessity. Conscription was back on the table. On January 1, 2026, Germany launches its new military service blueprint modeled on Sweden's selective conscription. The process begins not with a summons, but with a questionnaire. Every man turning 18 that year, about 700,000 in total, must register with federal authorities and complete a detailed survey. The questions probe health, education, and motivation to serve. Fitness and willingness are weighed together, filtering out those who cannot or will not serve before any further steps are taken. This selective approach is the system's foundation. Defense Minister Boris Pistorius has shaped the system around incentives rather than compulsion. Volunteers are offered a monthly payment of €2,600, a sum designed to outcompete most entry-level civilian jobs. The aim is to fill the ranks through positive motivation, not just legal obligation. Those who volunteer and pass medical exams are given priority for service contracts, training slots, and career perks, mirroring the Swedish approach where only a fraction of each age group is called up, but all are registered and assessed. The plan leans on incentives and priority to drive recruitment. If too few step forward, the fallback is clear. The Bundestag retains authority to activate a lottery-based draft, selecting conscripts at random from the registered pool. This measure is controversial because Germany's constitution currently limits compulsory service to men. Extending compulsory service to women would require a two-thirds majority in parliament and a constitutional amendment, a hurdle that remains hotly debated among lawmakers and legal scholars. For now, the system is designed to scale: voluntary intake first, targeted selection if necessary, and full mobilization only as a last resort. Each phase must clear legal and political scrutiny, but the machinery for mass service is being rebuilt from the ground up, one registration at a time. The prospect of a lottery and the constitutional questions around gender will determine how far the program can go. On May 22, 2025, Germany activated Armored Brigade 45 in Lithuania, a formation of 4,800 soldiers equipped with Leopard 2A8 main battle tanks and Puma infantry fighting vehicles. This is Germany's first permanent foreign deployment since World War II, stationed just 100 kilometers from the Russian border. The brigade's mission is to defend the Suwalki Gap, NATO's most exposed corridor, and its presence is a direct answer to alliance demands for credible forward defense. Chancellor Merz called the deployment a promise kept to our allies and to our own security. But putting boots on Baltic soil is only one piece of the plan. Behind the scenes, Germany's defense spending is undergoing a transformation on a scale not seen in decades. In February 2022, the Bundestag approved a €100 billion Sondervermögen, an emergency fund for rapid modernization. The annual defense budget is set to climb from €51.8 billion in 2024 to €86 billion in 2025. Reaching €162 billion by 2029. That figure would make Germany's military budget the largest in Europe, overtaking the United Kingdom and nearly doubling France's. The money is earmarked for new armored vehicles, advanced air defense, upgraded barracks, and expanded training facilities. Yet even with these resources, the Bundeswehr's ability to absorb and train new recruits remains tightly constrained. Years of barracks closures and staff reductions have left the system with a hard cap. Just 5,000 new soldiers can be processed each year under current conditions. Parliamentary Commissioner Eva Hogel in her 2025 readiness report put it bluntly, the Bundeswehr still has too little of everything. Equipment deliveries lag, and only about half of all units meet NATO's operational standards. Despite the influx of funds, bottlenecks in training, logistics, and procurement persist. The ambition to build Europe's strongest conventional army is real, but the risks are equally clear. Can Germany turn financial commitment and political resolve into actual military readiness before the 2029 deadline? The answer depends not just on money or hardware, but on the speed and scale of rebuilding an entire defense system from the ground up. Germany's push to rebuild its military is not just policy, it is a race against Russia's rearmament and NATO's 2029 deadline. As Europe's security equation shifts, every conscripted year now buys precious time. The stakes are no longer theoretical, they are measured in tanks, treaties, and the realities of war. What is your view?